Welcome back after a short break on another presentation. I'm now with Justin, who is Senior Cloud Advocate at Microsoft, and Justin today will show us and tell us how to modernize your legacy ASP.NET web apps by introducing Blazor hosting models. And as always, if you will have any question, we will answer at the end of the presentation and post them on the chat during the Justin presentation. Justin, the stage is yours.
Sure. Thanks, Matthias, for introducing me. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining my session. This session is all about Blazor hosting models and how we can migrate from your legacy ASP.NET web form application into the Blazor. Let me introduce myself. My name is Justin from Microsoft as a Senior Cloud Advocate. And this is my Twitter handle. So if you follow me on Twitter, then you will get lots of blogs about .NET, Azure, and the Power Platform. Right. So throughout this session, I'm going to cover these two topics. The first one is how we can migrate ASP.NET web form into the Blazor and what we need to consider for those migration. And once you make a decision to migration, then which kind of Blazor hosting models is suitable for your migration? So these two things I'm going to cover. Okay, let's start. So ASP.NET web form application to Blazor. So what's the benefit or what we need to consider for that? So when I say migration, it actually has more meaning than literally migration. So, the ASP.NET application used to be or is running on the Windows only platform. But if you migrate your existing application into the Blazor, then your application will be running on multiple operating systems, which we can say cross-platform. So what brings us the benefits of the migration to the cross-platform application? It's simply your organization will have more option for maintenance, cost management, and resource management as well. All right. So we used to have only one option, which is Windows. Now we have more option like Windows, Linux, and etc. Right. So this is one of the greatest benefit for the migration. And after you complete migration, your organization will unlock more features, which is only supporting on .NET 6, 7, and 8. Right? And the .NET Framework 4.8 is only in a maintenance mode. So you will not get more features, or you will not get more fancy features anymore. You will not get fancy features anymore. So many fancy features are only available on the modern .NET 6, 7, and 8. So how can you enjoy those new features? So if we want to really enjoy the new features, you need to ask your boss for migration, right? So let's think about the migration options. Which kind of migration options are available? And this time, this migration activity, we can call this migration activity as application modernization or app modernization. So first of all, there are a few things to consider. Which kind of the modernization path is available? The first one is web form to MVC model. So both have totally different application architecture. So if you follow this path, you will have to change almost everything on your UI logic other than the class libraries for your business logics. Okay. So because web form uses the page controls and MVC model uses the view and view model or something like that, which has totally different UI structure. As I said, web form has the concept of the component, which is control. but MVC doesn't have it. It means that your UI logic will be completely changed and will result in the migration development overhead. So if you can cope with this kind of overhead, and MVC is a good option as well. And what about this path? Your UI logic is transformed into existing the popular JavaScript framework like Angular, React, Vue, or Svelte. So you can use this with this the UI JavaScript-based UI framework. You can use a similar UI component approach like the webform has. However, you will have to change all your UI logic to JavaScript from C#. So in this case, you need to learn another language. And your existing UI logics like a page, UI page like ASPX page or ASCX controls are not that easy for migration from C# to JavaScript. So what about Blazor now? So it also has a similar UI component model concept to WinForms. So you can still use C# for the UI logic. And regardless of Blazor server or WebAssembly or hybrid, you can still use C# for the UI. And this is the greatest benefits of for developers. They don't have to leave the C# world. Your existing the UI page, like ASPX page or ASCX user controls, can be migrated into the component as similar as possible. So let's compare both Webform and Blazor side by side. As I mentioned before, Webform only supports Windows, while Blazor supports multiple platforms. And Webform only uses .NET Framework 1 to 4, and while the Blazor supports .NET Core 3 and later, such as .NET Core 3, 3.1, .NET 5, 6, 7, and 8. In terms of the application lifecycle management, Webform uses global.asax file, while Blazor uses program.cs. And both files actually take care of application pipeline and middleware, such as, for example, the IOC container can be managed within global.asax or program.cs, something like this. And for page rendering, Webform uses pages and controls, while Blazor uses Razor templates and component. So pages versus Razor templates and controls versus component. You can consider, you can think of this kind of comparison. So within the UI page, think about this. How we still need to handle C# code, bits and pieces, something like conditions or loop or something like that. How can we handle this kind of C# code? Webform uses the % sign, and Blazor uses the @ sign. So with this the syntax, and you can still use like the small bits of the C# code within the UI page as well. And also both has the code behind. The Webform has code behind of ASPX.cs file, and Blazor has code behind file of Razor.cs file. So ASPX file itself and Razor file itself only takes care of UI, I mean the HTML, the component, bits and pieces, while the ASPX.cx file and Razor.cs file takes care of all the C# code, like the C# code with like an event handling or something like that. So this is the brief comparison of using Webform and Blazor. They are very similar to each other. At the same time, they are very different from each other. So let's take a look at how existing Webform application can be migrated into Blazor application. So this is a simple demo. So I can show you. So let me show you about the Visual Studio now. So you have, so on the right-hand side, this is the simple, the web form application. I opened the fetch data page here, and it contains the user control like this. And the user control has this information. This only has the UI logic like this. And as you can see here, this %sign takes care of this C# code. Actually, there's more than. And within for this UI, all the UI logic takes care of this C# code like this. So page load event, and the page load event gets all the data, handles all the data, something like that. And here, this is the bottom one. Bottom 3 files are actually Blazor file. So Blazor file, I have the fetch data page, exactly the same page here. And this is a component, and this component can be defined within the Blazor server, Blazor application, but I extracted this component to another Blazor library files, Blazor component library. So like the fetch data component Blazor file, which is almost the same as each other with user control. And here, this is the code behind the file, and which is almost the same. So on initialize the sync, which is the page loading event, and it calls the service layer as well, which is business logic. So both are exactly the same. I mean, yeah, both the structure are very similar to each other. So let's run this web form application. So when I run this ASP.NET the ASP.NET web form application, and it will show us the similar page. So when when this application runs, the ASP.NET the application runs here, then it will show us the fetch data the page. So it takes time. Okay, so there is the fetch data page, and it has, when I click this, and this is coming from the user control side. So if I stop this application, and this time if I run this server application, Blazor server application, then it has a similar structure, right? And all we can see is the same logic, same UI logic, but different using from the different components. So which is the fetch data page. So we have the same logic. Only differences are the UI, like navigation side, but all the data is the same. And if I refresh the page, and we have the same logic, right? So we can we can easily migrate existing web form application into the Blazor server, right? So this is how we can migrate your existing user control of the web form application into the Blazor component. So by now, you make a decision to move your existing ASP.NET application into the Blazor. So you will have now a few options available for the Blazor, within the Blazor. So which Blazor models should you choose? Which Blazor model should we choose? So there are several Blazor hosting models available. Roughly, there are 3 actually. So one is Blazor Server, the second one is a WebAssembly, and the third one is Blazor Hybrid. But within the WebAssembly model, we have two distinctive models, which is hosted WebAssembly and standalone WebAssembly model. And the third one, Blazor Hybrid, we can choose MAUI, WinForm, or WPF. In here, WinForm and WPF is Windows only, but MAUI is supporting the cross-platform. So we have actually 6 different Blazor hosting models, and they have their the distinctive features. So we can choose based on the requirement we have. The first one is the Blazor server option, right? So this is the closest structure to existing ASP.NET web form that I showed you before. So what's the similarity between each other? What do I mean by closest? The web form usually contains the UI logic in itself. and it also contains the business logic as well. But business logic can be extracted into the class library as a form of class library, but still that class library runs within the ASP.NET web form application. So if you have the well-structured system architecture, you have separated business logic library, but as I said, it's still running within your application. Blazor server also has a similar structure like this. So both UI logic and business logics are served in one web application instance like this. And because of this nature, you can easily migrate your UI pages into Blazor component. That migration strategy is relatively simple like this. And your user controls can be migrated into the Blazor component as well, right? And you can use your business logics. I mean, as a separate class libraries, you can reuse it within the Blazor server. So all you need to care is that the migration of your existing UI logic into the Blazor. And once you complete migration from web form application into the Blazor server, then you might be wanting to look for another options like WebAssembly model, because it has a little bit different from the Blazor server model, right? And as I said, Blazor server has the integrated business logic and the UI logic within one server. But in terms of the cloud, the architecture, if we want to consider the cloud architecture, then it's probably a better idea to separate the UI logic from the business logic. So, but you want to run this application, both applications, as like in one application. So how is possible? So this is an example. Azure Static Web Apps. So Azure Static Web App or Azure serves the UI logic. At the same time, it hosts the business logic within the same instance. But actually, both are different instances, but Azure the integrate both. So from the user's perspective, general user's perspective, it runs as if one application. But inside the Azure, the application instance, it actually runs separately. So although both UI logic is on Blazor and business logic is on a backend API, right? So business logic can be as a functions API. Anyway, it's a separated backend API, but as I said, it seamlessly talk to each other as if both are in the same application like this. So therefore, the Blazor WebAssembly application, Blazor WASM, only takes care of the UI logic, and everything else, all the business logic is residing into the backend APIs. Even the business class library is referred by the backend APIs. But the good thing is they are running on the same instance, right? And the Blazor WebAssembly, its nature is that it's a static website. So all your business, the UI logic is exposed into the public. What does that mean? Your sensitive information also can also be exposed to the public. So you need to take extra care of this kind of sensitive information within your UI logic. Or I would recommend all the sensitive information need to be handled within the backend API, right? So all the front end, I mean the Blazor WASM application only calls the backend API to get all the data or something like that, right? And if you have multiple backend APIs, and I would recommend the backend API of Azure the Azure instance. Azure, the instance uses the backend API, and that backend API should be used as the facade API to talk to the many different APIs, or facade API work as like a facade API and that facade API talks to API management, and that API management take care of all the backend API side. So this is the ideal architecture of using the Azure and hosted Blazor WebAssembly application, right? So the good thing of using hosted Blazor, the Blazor WebAssembly application is that you can make use of server-side rendering, something like this. But the standalone Blazor WebAssembly application, you cannot use server-side rendering kind of stuff because it's completely running by itself, completely running alone. And the GitHub page is the perfect example of to host standalone Blazor WebAssembly application, right? So like the hosted Blazor was map, the Blazor only takes care of the UI logic. And this time, the GitHub pages cannot host the backend API. This is the real differences between the Azure and GitHub pages. So the GitHub pages cannot host backend API. So the standalone Blazor WASM application has to communicate with external backend APIs. But this time, because that backend API is hosted externally, I mean, without being protected by the GitHub pages or standalone the Blazor WebAssembly application. So also the UI logic also we need to consider there is no sensitive information stored within the UI logic, and the business logic stays in the external backend API, and that external backend API should be protected by extra the protection layer, something like OAuth, the authentication or other things. But you cannot use the API key because that API, when you use the API key, then the UI logic has to expose that API key as well. So you cannot use the API key, but like an auth, the integration authorization logic, then kind of access token can be generated whenever you want to access to the backend API application, something like this. So you need to put, as I said, put extra the protection layer for the external backend API. Now, so you have the Blazor WebAssembly application, and that Blazor WebAssembly application can be hosted as a web application, but that Blazor WebAssembly application can be wrapped with something else. This is the concept of Blazor hybrid. So if your customer or if your organization keeps wanting to use your existing Blazor WebAssembly application for desktop or mobile application, and what's the case? That this time Blazor hybrid with MAUI will be the answer. The architecture would be the same. So instead of using the GitHub pages or standalone Blazor WebAssembly application, you can use MAUI to host the Blazor WebAssembly application. Actually, MAUI is a kind of wrapper for your Blazor WebAssembly application. So this is the concept of Blazor hybrid. And this time you can build your business logic within with your UI logic within the Blazor hybrid with MAUI, or you can still separate. You can still call to the external backend API like this diagram. But I would recommend your client application, which contains only UI logic, and the business logic with your backend API need to be separated with each other. So as I said, the Blazor hybrid with MAUI only takes care of UI logic, right? And business logic is separated within the backend API, which is external backend API. So this is the Blazor hybrid with MAUI. And this time, what about you still have the legacy application of ASP.NET Web Form application, and which is running on Windows. And if your the application user, if your users of that ASP standard web form application still wants to use similar to like a Windows format or something like that, and instead of using the MAUI, you can still use WinForm this time. So Blazor hybrid with WinForm is another option, right? And this time, instead of using the MAUI shell, you can still use WinForm shell, Windows Form shell. So the architecture would be the same. So Windows Form with Windows Form shell, your Blazor WebAssembly application is wrapped with Windows Form shell, and that UI logic talks to the external backend API like this. And the WinForm actually doesn't understand the Blazor WebAssembly UI. So you need to have put some extra implementation logic like this. So in order to understand Blazor, the UI, the Blazor component, and you need to add this NuGet package called Microsoft ASP.NET Core Component WebView Windows Forms. So you need to add this NuGet package, and also you need to update your CS project file from using Microsoft.NET SDK to Microsoft.NET Razor SDK like this. And by simply changing this line, and your application is running, your Blazor WebAssembly application is running on Windows within the Windows Form shell. But the nature of Blazor WebAssembly application is web application, but Windows Form is not a web application. So how can we navigate each link? In this case, we need to consider kind of specifically craft our routing mechanism within the Windows Form. Right. So those navigation and routing need to have some extra implementation. And another one is WPF, Windows the Presentation Foundation. So instead of WinForm, we can use WPF the shell. So similar structure, right? This WPF shell with your existing Blazor WebAssembly application can be wrapped with WPF, and it talks to external business the backend APIs. And this time also, WPF itself doesn't understand Blazor component, so we need to include WebView too, which understands the Blazor component. And this WebView 2 comes from the Microsoft ASP.NET Core component WebView.wpf. So you need to include this NuGet package, and also you need to change your CS project file from .NET SDK to .NET Razor SDK. Also, similar to the WinForm, we need to WPF shelled the Blazor WebAssembly application need a separate navigation and routing logic. So I'm going to show those 6 different the Blazor hosting models. So first one I showed you already, the Blazor server model. So I'm going to skip that. Now, so we have so I'm going to close everything, and we have the component. We are going to reuse this the Blazor component, and on the standalone WebAssembly application, and we have the similar concept, the fetch data concept. So we have similar fetch data in this page, and we call the same component as well. Now, also we have the hosted WASM application, the same thing, and we have the same fetch data, and we call the same component as well. So if I run the hosted Blazor WebAssembly application, such as the Azure Static Web Apps, something like that, then we can emulate this like a SWA start. So once we run this SWA start application, it actually emulates the SWA the application on my local machine. So in this case, this one actually integrate both the WebAssembly application and backend API as like in one application. So So once it's running, so it hosts the localhost at 5,000 ports, and this time it runs the backend API like this, a functions API like this. Then it actually opens the localhost 4280 port. So let's wait a few seconds more. Then once it's run, the web page is running. Then so I can show the another one. So how many more minutes do we have? I think we have the 35 minutes. But now it still takes time. So probably I don't think it's gonna be running now. So I'm going to stop it. And this time, so I'm going to run as an external the same backend API as like an external backend API. And this time, I'm going to run the standalone web application. Yes. Then application runs on this. So this is the standalone Blazor WebAssembly application. So this is the fetch data. And if so this is the calling the external backend API. So if I refresh this page, and when you see on the right-hand side, you will be able to see the API is keep called. Right. So if I refresh this page again, and the API keeps calling like this, right? So this is how the standalone Blazor WebAssembly application is working. So I'm going to close this now, and then because we have we don't have enough time, so I will run Blazor MAUI model, which is a Blazor hybrid MAUI model, something like this. So when I run this the Blazor MAUI model, and it actually it's the Windows-based the MAUI model, but if I target this MAUI model into the Android application or iOS application, and you can see the mobile phone layer. Now, so we still have the backend API. If I click the fetch data, then it keeps calling the backend API. And if I refresh the page, it keeps calling, right? So it talks to the backend API, but we are still using the same Blazor WebAssembly application, like standalone application or Blazor sub application. So this is how we can reuse the existing Blazor Watson application. Now, so I think we have the already time. So I'm going back to so if I have more time, I can show you more the demo with the same logic. But so as I said, I just showed you a Blazor MAUI model, and there is the WinForm model, and WinForm model also has the same pages fetch data, and WPF hybrid WPF model also has the fetch data. Everything is the same. Only difference is the shell. Which shell? MAUI shell or WinForm shell or WPF shell? We are going to choose, right? And the inside the shell, we are always using the same Blazor WebAssembly application, like the standalone web application. It's almost the end. So let's summarize it. What we have discussed during this session were two things. How to migrate your existing ASP.NET Web Form application into the Blazor. And once you make a decision for migration, and we need to consider which type of Blazor hosting model is useful for our migration. So these two things, I hope you have better understanding of the migration strategy and what kind of Blazor hosting model is useful for your migration. And this is the actual demo app used in the session. So aka.ms/Blazor hosting models, or take the QR code. And I really want you to run this application on your machine and compare what the differences are. Right. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening. It's Justin, and see you next time.
Thank you very much, Justin, for your presentation. And I will look at our chat if we have any question to your presentation. and I don't see. So
Okay.
I believe it's the end of this slot. So please remember that you can rate Justin's presentation using stars under the video, and see you on the next talk after a short break.
Thank you.